The rain pounded against the tall, arched windows of Blackwell Manor, a relentless drumbeat that seemed to echo the turmoil in Elena Harper's chest. Lightning flashed, illuminating the grand hall in jagged bursts, casting eerie shadows across the marble floors she'd scrubbed for years. Her hands, serrachum, calloused from a decade of service, gripped a silver tray so tightly her knuckles whitened. On it sat a crystal glass of water in a small vial of medicine, its amber liquid glinting faintly in the dim light. She moved silently through the mansion, her steps deliberate, her breath shallow. The air smelled of old wood and wax, heavy with the weight of secrets this house had held long before she arrived. Tonight felt different. Master Terticio, though, charged, like the storm outside was a prelude to something she couldn't yet name. Elena paused at the foot of the grand staircase, her dark brown eyes flicking upward. 10 years she'd worked for Victor Blackwell, a man whose name carried power in every corner of New York. She'd started as a girl of 19, wide-eyed and grateful for the job, polishing his silver, pressing his suits, preparing his meals. He'd been a towering figure then, broad-shouldered, sharp-jawed, with green eyes that could cut through steel. She'd admired him from a distance, not out of affection but awe. He was untouchable, a king in his castle, but time and illness had chipped away at that image, leaving behind a man she barely recognized. The news of his cancer had come 6 months ago, whispered among the staff like a ghost story. Elena hadn't cried. She didn't know him well enough for tears, but it had shaken her. A quiet tremor beneath her steady routine. Now one. As she climbed the stairs, each creak of the wood felt like a warning. Her uniform, a simple black dress with a crisp white apron, clung to her damp skin, the storm having caught her earlier as she dashed from the servants' quarters. Her curly black hair, usually pinned neatly, had loosened, strands sticking to her forehead. She didn't bother fixing it. Victor wouldn't care. He hadn't cared about much lately. Not the dust gathering on his bookshelves or the meals she left untouched by his bedside. But tonight, he'd asked for her specifically. Not the nurse, not the butler, her detainer. The door to his room loomed ahead, carved oak with brass fittings, a portal to a world she'd only ever entered as a servant. She knocked softly, her heart thudding louder than the sound her knuckles made. His voice rasped, weaker than she remembered, a shadow of the commanding tone that once filled boardrooms. She pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room smelled of antiseptic and lavender, a strange mix that stung her nose. Victor sat propped against a mountain of pillows, his once muscular frame swallowed by a silk robe. His hair, still thick but now silver, fell across his forehead, and those piercing green eyes locked onto her the moment she entered. But there was something new in them, something raw, unguarded, desperation, fear. Elena couldn't place it, but it sent a shiver down her spine. "Elena," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "Set that down and sit." He gestured to the chair beside his bed, a velvet-upholstered relic she'd never dared touch. She hesitated, the tray wobbling in her hands. This wasn't how it worked. She delivered. She left. That was the rhythm of their lives. But his gaze held her, steady and unyielding, and she obeyed. Placing the tray on the bedside table with a faint clink, she sat, perching on the edge of the chair, her hands folding tightly in her lap. The storm roared outside, wind rattling the windows. But inside, the silence stretched taut between them. Victor leaned forward, wincing as he did, and she fought the urge to reach out, to steady him. He wasn't hers to touch. "I don't have much time left," he said finally, his words cutting through the quiet like a blade. "The doctors, they don't say it outright, but I see it in their eyes. Weeks, maybe months if I'm lucky." Her throat tightened. She'd known he was sick, of course, but hearing it from him, so plain and final, made her chest ache. "I'm sorry, Mr. Blackwell," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. What else could she say? She wasn't trained for this. Comforting a dying man wasn't in her job description. He shook his head, a faint, bitter smile tugging at his lips. "Don't be sorry. I've had everything. Elena? No. Money, influence, this damn house. More than most men dream of. But it's all hollow without someone to leave it to." His eyes bored into hers, intense and searching. "I need an heir, and I need your help." The words hit her like a punch, stealing the air from her lungs. Her mind reeled, scrambling to make sense of them. An heir, her help, she stared at him, her mouth parting but no sound coming out. Her pulse raced, a frantic drumbeat in her ears. Mr. Erwin. Blackwell, I don't understand, she stammered, her voice shaking. You're asking me to... She couldn't finish the sentence. The idea too wild, too absurd to speak aloud. He nodded, his expression unreadable, but his eyes burning with something fierce. I know it's a lot to ask. Hell, it's selfish, Sorn. I wouldn't if I had another choice. But you're the only one I trust. Elena, it's someone to me. You're steady, kind, loyal, one. You've been here through everything, never asking for more than what I gave you. If you agree, I'll make sure you and the child are set for life. You'll never want for anything. Her hands gripped the edge of the chair, nails digging into the fabric. Her head spun, a chaotic swirl of shock and fear and disbelief. She'd spent her life in the background, invisible, content with her quiet existence, cleaning, cooking, fading into the walls of this mansion. And now Victor Blackwell, the man she'd served for a decade, was asking her to step into his world in a way she'd never imagined, to bear his child, to tie herself to him forever. This isn't something I can decide right now, she whispered, her voice trembling as she stood, needing distance, needing air. Her hands shook as she smoothed her apron. A nervous habit. I need time to think. Victor's gaze softened, though that strange intensity lingered. I understand, he said, his voice rough with exhaustion. Take the time you need. I won't push you. He leaned back, closing his eyes for a moment, and she saw the weariness etched into every line of his face. He looked smaller somehow, fragile in a way she'd never thought possible. She fled the room, her footsteps quick and uneven, the tray forgotten on the table. The hall stretched endlessly before her, the storm's howl chasing her as she descended the stairs. Her small room in the servants' quarters felt like a sanctuary when she reached it, the door clicking shut behind her. She sank onto the narrow bed, her breath coming in short. Ragged gasps, rain streaked the tiny window, blurring the world outside, and she stared at it, her mind a tangle of emotions. She'd always been practical, grounded. Her life was simple: work hard, save what she could, maybe one day buy a little place of her own. She didn't dream of wealth or grandeur. Those were for people like Victor. But now he'd handed her a choice that could shatter that simplicity. A child, his child, a legacy she hadn't asked for but couldn't unhear. Elena lay back, staring at the cracked ceiling, her hands resting on her stomach. She tried to imagine it, a baby, a life growing inside her. She'd never thought much about motherhood. Her own parents had died when she was young, leaving her to fend for herself. She'd built a wall around her heart, not out of bitterness, but survival. Could she do this? Could she bring a child into the world for a man who might not live to see them take their first steps? The night stretched on, sleepless and heavy. She replayed his words, his tired green eyes, the way his voice had cracked when he'd said he trusted her. Victor Blackwell, the man who'd built an empire, was alone, no wife, no children. No family to claim what he'd made. She'd seen the loneliness in him before, in the quiet moments when he sat by the fire, staring into the flames, but she'd never understood it until now. By morning, the storm had softened to a drizzle, the world outside gray and muted. Elena moved through her duties in a daze, her hands trembling as she prepared Victor's breakfast. Black coffee, toast, croissant, a single egg, the way he liked it. She carried the tray to his room, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst. When she stepped inside, he was awake, sitting up, his eyes finding hers immediately. Have you thought about it, Maid? He asked, his voice quieter than the night before, as if he'd spent his strength already. She set the tray down, her fingers lingering on the edge, steadying herself. Yes, she said, forcing the word out. She took a deep breath, meeting his gaze. And I'll do it. Relief flooded his face, softening the hard lines of his jaw. Thank you, Elena Montanon. He whispered, his voice thick with emotion. You don't know what this means to me. She nodded, her throat tight, her stomach twisting with a mix of resolve and uncertainty. She'd made her choice, but the weight of it pressed down on her, heavy and unyielding. Victor had always been fair to her, kind in his distant way. If she could give him this, if she could ease the fear in his eyes, then maybe it was worth it. But as she stood there, watching him sip his coffee with shaky hands, she couldn't shake the feeling that her life had just shifted onto a path she couldn't yet see. The days that followed were a blur of arrangements. Victor's lawyer arrived that afternoon, a stern man in a pinstripe suit who spread documents across the bed. Elena sat across from him, her hands clasped tightly, listening as he explained trusts and inheritances in a language she barely understood. Victor watched her, his expression calm but firm. You and the child will have everything, he promised. The estate. The accounts, more than you'll ever need. She signed where they told her, her hand trembling, the pen scratching against the paper. It felt surreal, like she was playing a part in someone else's story. Mr. Prunem, Cerny, Blackwell. Are you sure? She asked, her voice small. There must be others, people more suited to this. He chuckled. A weak, raspy sound. No one's more suited than you. Elena, you're giving me something no one else can. That's worth more than all of this. He gestured vaguely at the room. The mansion, the empire beyond its walls. Her chest tightened, a strange warmth mixing with her fear. She'd never been important. Not like this. She'd been a shadow. A pair of hands to keep the house running. Now she was something else, someone he needed. It scared her. But it stirred something deep inside her too, something she couldn't name. That evening, she stood before the cracked mirror in her room, staring at her reflection. Her dark eyes looked back, wide and uncertain, her curls a wild halo around her face. She touched her stomach, her fingers tentative. What would it feel like, she wondered, to carry a piece of him, to step out of the life she'd known and into something new? A knock startled her. She opened the door to find Victor standing there, leaning heavily on a cane. He looked frail, his robe hanging loose, sereniwam, but his eyes were soft, almost tender. Are you sure about this? He asked, his voice a whisper. I don't want you to feel trapped. Her breath caught, his concern, so unexpected, eased the knot in her chest. I wouldn't have said yes if I wasn't, she replied, her voice steadier than she felt. This wasn't about love or desire, it was about trust, about giving him peace. She stepped aside, letting him in, and the silence between them felt different now, heavy with a shared understanding. The weeks that followed were strange, fragile. Elena went through her days as always, dusting the chandeliers, folding linens, but every glance from Victor carried new weight. She watched him fade, his strength slipping away bit by bit. Some mornings, he couldn't leave his bed, his breath shallow, his skin pale. She stayed by him, adjusting his pillows, coaxing him to eat, her hands gentle but firm. It hurt to see him like this. A man who'd once seemed invincible, reduced to whispers and shadows. One rainy morning, she stood in the bathroom, a pregnancy test trembling in her hands. Two pink lines stared back at her, stark and undeniable. Her knees buckled, and she sank to the floor, a sob catching in her throat. She was pregnant. Victor's child, her child, was real now. Not just a promise. Fear crashed over her, sharp and cold. But beneath it, something else flickered. Hope. Pride. Namely, Deri. She didn't know, but it rooted her to the spot, her hands pressing against her stomach. She found him in his room, hunched over a stack of papers, his glasses slipping down his nose. He looked up as she entered, and the moment he saw her face, he froze. Elena, he said, his voice soft. Hernan, questioning. I'm pregnant, she whispered, holding up the test, her hands still shaking. For a moment, there was only silence. Then a smile broke across his face, small and tired but genuine. Thank you, he murmured, reaching for her hand. His fingers were weak, but they squeezed hers with surprising warmth. You've given me something to hold on to. Tears stung her eyes, and she blinked them back, nodding. She'd done this for him, but standing there, feeling his gratitude, she realized it was for her too. This child would change everything, her world, his legacy, and she wasn't sure she was ready. But she'd said yes, and she wouldn't turn back. Victor's decline accelerated after that. Some days, he could barely speak, his body too weak to fight the disease eating him away. Elena stayed close, reading to him from his favorite books, telling him about the baby, how she'd felt the first flutters, how she'd started dreaming of names. He'd listen, his eyes half closed, a faint smile on his lips. Often, "Mi amor no bueno más." He'd rest his hand on her growing belly, his touch light but reverent, as if he could feel the life inside her. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the room in gold, he grabbed her hand, his grip frail. "Elena," he rasped, "promise me something." She leaned in. "If Prenia were not for years," her heart clenching. "Anything. Promise you'll take care of our child. Give them the love I won't be able to." His voice broke, and she saw tears glisten in his eyes. "I promise," she said, her voice firm despite the lump in her throat. "I'll love them. Victor, for both of us." He smiled, a ghost of the man he'd been, and sank back into the pillows. Peaceful, she held his hand, her tears falling silently, knowing each day brought them closer to goodbye. When the end came, it was sudden. The doctors rushed in, their faces grim, but Elena knew before they spoke. Victor's breathing grew ragged, his chest heaving, then slowing. She knelt beside him, clutching his hand, her sobs quiet but unstoppable. "Don't go," she whispered, pressing his palm to her belly, letting him feel the kicks one last time. "We need you." His eyes found hers, cloudy but warm. "You're strong, Elena." He breathed. "Stronger than, you'll be an amazing mother." His voice faded, his hands slackened, and with one final shudder, he was gone. The silence was deafening. She stayed there, holding him, until the nurses gently pulled her away. The world blurred, funeral plans, condolences. The mansion emptying of its master's presence. She stood by his grave days later, her hands cradling her belly, the weight of loss and life pressing against her ribs. She was alone now, but not entirely. His child, her child, kept her tethered. Months later, in the quiet of a spring dawn, Elena gave birth to a boy. She named him Lucas, a name Victor had mentioned once, his voice wistful. Holding him, Nesarmons, his tiny fingers curling around hers, she wept, tears of grief, of joy, of something fierce and unbroken. "You're a miracle," she whispered, kissing his forehead. Victor was gone, but he lived on in Lucas, in the green flecks of his eyes, in the strength she'd found within herself. The mansion stood quieter now, its halls less grand without Victor's presence. But as Elena rocked Lucas to sleep, she felt a new purpose settle into her bones. She'd been a maid, a shadow once trusted, a sister reaffirmed, a servant. Now she was a mother, a keeper of a legacy, a woman who'd faced the unknown and emerged whole. Victor had believed in her, and for the first time, she believed in herself too. The first months with Lucas were a whirlwind of sleepless nights and fragile hope. Elena moved through Blackwell Manor like a ghost, her arms cradling the infant who now filled the silence Victor had left behind. The staff dwindled after his death. Some retired. Others sought work elsewhere, but Elena stayed. The mansion was hers now. Or rather, Lucas's, secured by the papers she'd signed in Victor's final days. She didn't feel like its mistress. Though, the towering ceilings and endless corridors still dwarfed her, a reminder of the life she'd lived on the edges of this world. But Lucas's soft coos, his tiny hands grasping at her fingers, grounded her in a way nothing else could. She set up a nursery in a room near her own, one that had once been a guest suite with wide windows overlooking the gardens. She painted the walls a soft blue, her hands steady despite the exhaustion that clung to her like damp fog. The crib was simple, secondhand, bought with her own savings before Victor's fortune became hers to touch. She didn't want his money, not yet. It felt too heavy, too tied to the man who'd given her both a burden and a gift. Instead, she lived off what she'd always known: hard work, thrift. A chiffon, the rhythm of a servant's life. But every night, as she rocked Lucas to sleep, she'd catch herself staring at him, marveling at the way his green eyes, Victor's eyes, shone in the lamplight. He was hers, wholly and completely, yet a piece of him belonged to the man who'd changed her forever. The lawyer, Mr. Grayson, visited often in those early weeks, his polished shoes clicking against the marble floors. He was a wiry man with sharp cheekbones and sharper eyes. always carrying a briefcase stuffed with documents. Miss Harper, when Ostranda turned up widows he'd say, he'd say, his voice clipped but not unkind. You need to understand what's yours now. The estate, the investments, it's all in trust for the boy, but you're the executor. You can't keep living like this. He gestured vaguely at her worn apron, the cracked dishes she still used, as if her refusal to embrace Victor's wealth was a personal affront. Elena would nod, her hands twisting in her lap, but she couldn't meet his gaze. I'm not ready, Serena Sawine. She'd say, her voice low, it doesn't feel right yet. Grayson would sigh, adjust his glasses, and leave her with another stack of papers she'd shove into a drawer. She knew he was right. Victor had meant for her to have this, for Lucas to have it, but the idea of stepping into that life made her stomach churn. She wasn't a Blackwell. She was Elena Harper, daughter of a factory worker and a seamstress, a woman who'd spent her years scrubbing floors, not commanding fortunes, but the world didn't wait for her to be ready. Letters arrived daily, condolence notes from Victor's business associates, requests for meetings from men in suits who saw Lucas as a key to their own ambitions. The Blackwell name carried weight, and now it rested on her son's tiny shoulders. Elena burned most of the letters in the fireplace, the flames licking at the heavy stationery. But the pressure grew. One morning, a sleek black car pulled up the drive, and a man in a tailored coat stepped out, his presence as commanding as Victor's once had been. He introduced himself as Charles Wentworth, Victor's oldest friend and a titan in the shipping industry. I knew Victor for 30 years, he said, standing in the parlor, his gray eyes scanning the room as if measuring its worth. He was a stubborn bastard, but he trusted you. That's why I'm here. Elena stood stiffly, Lucas asleep in her arms, her heart pounding. Wentworth's gaze softened when it landed on the baby. He's got Victor's look. That's good. The world will see him as a Blackwell. What do you want? She asked, her voice sharper than she intended. She didn't trust this man. With his polished words and expensive watch, he reminded her too much of the life Victor had lived, a life she'd never understood. Wentworth smiled, a thin, calculating curve of his lips. To help, Victor's empire needs a steward until the boy's old enough. I can manage things, keep the vultures at bay. You don't know this world, Elena. No, turn. I do. Her jaw tightened. She wanted to send him away, to slam the door and lock herself in with Lucas, but doubt gnawed at her. She didn't know this world, stocks, mergers, the games of power Victor had played so effortlessly. What if she failed Lucas? What if she couldn't protect what Victor had left him? I'll think about it, she said finally. Her tone clipped. Wentworth nodded, handed her his card, and left, the scent of his cologne lingering like a warning. That night, she sat by the nursery window, Lucas sleeping in his crib, the moon casting silver light across his face. She traced Wentworth's card with her finger, her mind racing. She didn't want to need anyone, but the weight of Victor's legacy was crushing her. She'd promised to protect Lucas, to give him the life Victor couldn't. Maybe Wentworth was right. Maybe she couldn't do it alone. But the thought of handing over control, of letting someone else shape her son's future, made her chest ache with a fierce, protective fire. Spring turned to summer, and Lucas grew, his cries louder, his smiles brighter. Elena found herself softening, the sharp edges of her grief dulling as she watched him discover the world. She'd take him to the gardens, letting him tug at the grass with chubby hands, her laughter mingling with his giggles. It was in those moments she felt Victor most keenly, not as the dying man she'd last seen, but as the father he'd wanted to be. She'd talk to him sometimes, late at night when the house was still, her voice a whisper. He's strong, Victor. Like you, we could not show. I wish you could see him. But the quiet couldn't last. One humid afternoon, as she folded laundry in the kitchen, a knock rattled the back door. She opened it to find a woman standing there. Tall, angular, with auburn hair pulled into a tight bun. Her eyes, yours fasun, a cold blue, flicked over Elena with thinly veiled disdain. I'm Lillian Carver, she said, her voice smooth as silk but edged with steel. Victor's cousin. I assume you're the maid he left everything to. Elena's stomach dropped. She'd heard of Lillian, whispers among the staff about a distant relative who clashed with Victor years ago. A woman cut from his will after some bitter feud. I'm Elena Harper, she said, straightening, her arms crossing over her chest. And this is my home now. What do you want? Lillian's lips curled into a smirk. You're home. That's generous, I'm here for what's mine. Victor was sick, desperate. You took advantage of that. Didn't you? Convinced him to sign over everything to you and that child. Her gaze darted toward the hallway, where Lucas's babbling drifted faintly. Anger flared in Elena's chest. Hot and immediate. I didn't convince him of anything. He chose this for Lucas. Lucas were a dumb one. So Lillian repeated, her tone dripping with mockery. A bastard born to a servant. You think that makes him a Blackwell? I'll contest the will. The courts will see reason. A maid doesn't inherit an empire. Elena's hands clenched into fists, her nails biting into her palms. Get out, she said, her voice low and trembling with fury. You don't know what he wanted. You weren't here. Lillian's eyes narrowed, but she didn't move. This isn't over, she said, turning on her heel and stalking back to her car, her heels clicking like gunfire on the stone path. Elena slammed the door, her breath coming in sharp gasps. She leaned against it, her body shaking, fear and rage warring inside her. Lillian was a threat, a real one, and Elena had no idea how to fight her. She scooped Lucas from his high chair, holding him close. You're sick and kin, his warmth steadying her. No one's taking you from me, she whispered into his soft hair, her voice fierce. No one. But as she stood there, the enormity of what lay ahead crashed over her. Lillian wasn't just a spiteful relative, she was a predator, circling a fortune Elena barely understood. And Lucas, innocent and oblivious, was caught in the middle. The next morning, she dug Wentworth's card from the drawer and dialed his number, her fingers trembling. Mr. Wentworth, der Billionaire, she said when he answered, her voice steady despite the storm in her chest. I need your help. Someone's coming for Lucas's inheritance. I can't let that happen. His response was immediate, fairly calm, and assured Macho Wernum, Heir Master. I'll be there tomorrow. We will handle it. Elena, Victor trusted you. I'll make sure his wishes stand. She hung up, her heart pounding, a mix of relief and dread settling in her bones. She'd spent her life avoiding battles, staying small and safe. But for Lucas, for the promise she'd made Victor, she'd fight. She looked at her son, sleep in her arms, and felt a resolve harden within her. This was her family now, her legacy to protect. And no one, not Lillian Carver or anyone else, would take it from her. Summer faded into fall, and with Wentworth's help, Elena began to navigate the labyrinth of Victor's world. He taught her the basics, how to read the financial statements, who to trust, who to avoid. Desirinon. It was overwhelming, a language of numbers and power she'd never spoken. But she learned, driven by a quiet, burning determination. Lillian filed her lawsuit, claiming Victor had been coerced, but Wentworth's team of lawyers dismantled her case piece by piece. Elena sat through the hearings, her hands clasped tightly. Lucas in a sitter's care back at the manor. Each victory felt hollow. She didn't want this war, but each one secured Lucas's future a little more. By winter, the courts ruled in her favor. The judge's gavel a final, resounding echo of Victor's will. Lillian disappeared, her threats reduced to bitter silence, and Elena exhaled for what felt like the first time in months. The manor was quiet again. The fight over, but she knew it wouldn't be the last. Victor's name drew attention, vultures, as Wentworth called them, and she'd need to be ready. One snowy evening, she stood by the fireplace, Lucas toddling at her feet, his laughter filling the room. She watched him, her heart swelling with a love so fierce it scared her. She'd been a maid, a nobody, a woman who'd lived in shadows. Now she was a mother, a guardian, a force. Victor had seen strength in her, and through Lucas, she'd found it. The road ahead was uncertain. Money and power brought enemies she couldn't yet imagine. But as she scooped Lucas into her arms, pressing a kiss to his forehead, she knew one thing. She'd face it all. For him, for them, for the legacy they'd build together. The snow fell thicker that winter, blanketing Blackwell Manor in a hush that felt both peaceful and isolating. Elena stood at the nursery window, her breath fogging the glass, watching the flakes swirl in the dim glow of the garden lights. Lucas slept behind her, his soft snores a steady rhythm in the quiet room. At 18 months, he was a bundle of energy by day, chasing shadows, tugging at her skirt, his green eyes wide with curiosity. But at night, he was hers again, small and vulnerable, a reminder of why she'd uprooted her life. She pressed her palm to the cold pane, her reflection staring back. A woman she barely recognized, with tired eyes and a set jaw, hardened by months of battles she'd never wanted to fight. The victory over Lillian Carver had settled one storm, but it hadn't brought the calm Elena had hoped for. The manor, or Dursurita Brasen, once a place of routine and servitude, now felt like a fortress she had to defend. Charles Wentworth had become a fixture, his visits shifting from legal counsel to something closer to mentorship. He'd arrive with files and coffee, spreading papers across the dining table, his voice steady as he explained the sprawling web of Victor's holdings, shipping companies, real estate, was certain, investments tangled across continents. Elena listened, her head aching from the flood of information, her hands stained with ink from notes she scribbled to keep up. She didn't trust Wentworth fully, his smoothness. His ease in this world made her wary, but she needed him. For now. Ornantimo. Victor built this for decades, Wentworth said one afternoon, tapping a map of properties pinned to the wall. They were in the study, a room Elena had rarely entered in her maid days, its leather chairs and towering bookshelves still carrying Victor's scent, cigar smoke and old paper. He didn't just want wealth, Elena. He wanted permanence. That's what Lucas represents. She nodded, her fingers tracing the edge of a ledger. I get that. Bertie was Serbifarnorn. But I don't know how to be this person, the one who runs all this. I'm not him. Wentworth leaned back, his gray eyes studying her. You don't have to be. Victor didn't choose you because you're like him. He chose you because you're not. You're real. Elena, grounded. That's what Lucas needs, not another tycoon, but a mother who'll keep him human. His words landed heavy, stirring a warmth she hadn't expected. She looked away, her throat tight, and busied herself with stacking papers. Wentworth didn't push, just sipped his coffee and let the silence sit. She appreciated that about him. He knew when to stop talking. A rare trait in a man who thrived on control. But his faith in her, like Victor's, felt like a weight she wasn't sure she could carry. Life with Lucas kept her tethered. Though he was growing fast, his babbling turning to words, Mama. Ball. No. Each one a small triumph that made her chest ache with pride. She'd moved them into a suite on the second floor, abandoning the servants' quarters for good. The space was still modest by the manor's standards. A bedroom for her, the nursery for Lucas, a sitting area with a worn couch she'd dragged up herself, but it was theirs. She'd hung a photo of Victor on the wall, one she'd found in a drawer, him on a yacht, wind in his hair, a rare smile softening his sharp features. Lucas would point at it sometimes, his chubby finger jabbing the glass, and Elena would say, "That's your dad," her voice steady despite the pang in her heart. But the manor wasn't just a home anymore. It was a magnet. People came, drawn by the Blackwell name, their motives veiled in smiles and handshakes. A woman claiming to be Victor's old secretary arrived one crisp morning, her perfume sharp and her story vague, asking about unresolved business. Elena sent her away, her gut screaming caution. A week later, a journalist called, Dorian in Serpinio, fishing for a story about the maid who inherited an empire. She hung up, her hands shaking, and unplugged the phone. The world outside was hungry, and she felt like prey, guarding Lucas from shadows she couldn't name. Wentworth warned her it would get worse. Victor's death left a vacuum, he said over dinner one night, the two of them eating takeout in the kitchen while Lucas smeared mashed peas across his tray. People will test you, his rivals, his allies, even strangers. They'll see a young woman, a single mother, and think you're weak. You've got to show them you're not. I don't know how, she admitted, pushing her food around her plate. I'm not weak, but I'm not ruthless. That's not me. He set his fork down, his expression softening. You don't need to be ruthless. You just need to be smart. Trust your instincts. They've gotten you this far. And lean on me when you have to. Victor would have wanted that. She nodded, but doubt gnawed at her. She'd survived Lillian by instinct. Yes, son. But that was one fight. How many more waited? How long could she shield Lucas from a world that saw him as a prize? Not a child. She looked at him, his face sticky and beaming, and felt a surge of resolve. She'd figure it out. She had to. Spring brought new challenges. The manor's upkeep drained the accounts faster than she'd expected. Leaky roofs, ancient plumbing, gardens overgrown from neglect. Wentworth suggested selling off some assets, but Elena resisted. "This is Lucas's," she said, her voice firm. Victor wanted him to have it all. So she learned to negotiate, haggling with contractors, poring over budgets late into the night. Her hands, once rough from scrubbing, now cramped from writing checks and signing forms. She hated it, the numbers, the endless decisions, but she did it, driven by a promise she'd made to a dying man. Then came the letter. It arrived on a rainy April day, the envelope thick and embossed with a law firm's logo. Elena opened it at the kitchen table, Lucas napping upstairs, her coffee cooling beside her. The words blurred at first, legal jargon swimming before her eyes. But one phrase stood out. Claim to the Blackwell estate. Her heart sank. Another cousin, Daniel Blackwell, Victor's nephew from a long-estranged brother. He argued Victor's will was invalid, that Elena had manipulated a sick man, that Lucas had no rightful claim. The letter ended with a summons to court. She dropped it, her hands trembling, anger and fear twisting in her gut. Not again. She thought Lillian had been the end. But here was another shadow, another threat. She called Wentworth, her voice shaking as she read him the letter. "He's got money," Wentworth said, his tone grim. "And a better story than Lillian. Family ties, not just spite. This won't be easy." Elena paced the kitchen, her mind racing. "I can't lose this." Charles, not for me, for Lucas. Victor wanted him to have this life. "I know," he said, his voice steadying her. "We'll fight it. I've got people digging into Daniel already. If he's got skeletons, we'll find them. But Elena, you need to be ready. This one's personal. Personal. The word echoed as she hung up, her hands curling into fists. Daniel didn't know her, didn't know Lucas, but he wanted to strip them of everything Victor had given. She thought of Victor's last days, his weak smile, his hand on her belly, his trust in her, and fury burned through her fear. She wouldn't let this man, this stranger, undo that. The fight stretched into summer, a slow grind of depositions and hearings. Elena sat in courtrooms, her stomach knotted, listening as Daniel's lawyers painted her as a schemer, a gold digger who'd preyed on Victor's vulnerability. She wanted to scream, to tell them about the nights she'd held his hand, the promise she'd kept, but Wentworth kept her quiet. "Let the evidence speak," he'd whisper, his hand on her shoulder. And it did. Victor's doctors testified to his clarity, his lawyer to his intent. Daniel, a slick man with Victor's jawline, but none of his warmth, faltered under cross-examination, his past riddled with debts and failed ventures. In August, the judge ruled him. The will stood. Elena exhaled, tears prickling her eyes as Wentworth squeezed her hand. Daniel stormed out, his face red, and she watched him go, relief washing over her like rain. Another battle won, another piece of Lucas's future secured. But as she drove home, the victory felt muted. How many more? She wondered. How long until the next one? Back at the manor, she found Lucas in the garden with the nanny, chasing butterflies, his laughter bright against the fading light. She knelt beside him, pulling him into her arms, his warmth chasing away the day's chill. "We're okay," she whispered, more to herself than him. He giggled, oblivious, and she held him tighter, her heart steadying. That night, she sat in Victor's study, a glass of wine in hand, something she'd never dared when he was alive. The room felt less daunting now, its shadows softened by her presence. She opened a drawer and found a letter, yellowed and unsealed, in Victor's jagged handwriting. Her breath caught as she unfolded it. "Elena," it began, "if you're reading this, I'm gone, and you've kept your promise. I knew you would. You're stronger than you think, braver than I ever was. Lucas is my legacy, but you're his foundation. Don't let this world break you. It'll try. Trust yourself. You're enough." Tears slipped down her cheeks, silent and hot. She pressed the letter to her chest, her sobs quiet so as not to wake Lucas. Victor had known the fight she'd face, the strength she'd need, and he'd believed in her. Even then, the years ahead stretched uncertain, a tapestry of trials she couldn't predict. But as she sat there, the manor quiet around her, she felt a shift. She wasn't just a maid anymore, nor just a mother. She was Elena Harper, keeper of a legacy, a woman forged in loss and love. Lucas would grow, and she'd guide him through wealth, through danger, through a world that would test them both. And she'd do it with Victor's faith in her heart, a compass for the battles to come. Fall settled over Blackwell Manor like a sigh, the leaves turning crimson and gold, drifting across the lawns in lazy spirals. Elena watched them from the porch, a mug of tea warming her hands, the steam curling into the crisp air. Lucas darted through the grass ahead, 3 years old now. His dark curls bouncing as he chased a ball with relentless glee. His laughter rang out, sharp and clear, cutting through the stillness that had become her constant companion. She smiled, a soft ache blooming in her chest. He was Victor's echo, those green eyes, that stubborn tilt of his chin, but he was hers too, shaped by her voice, her touch, her fierce, quiet love. The past year had been a fragile peace, a pause between storms. Daniel Blackwell's defeat had silenced the immediate threats, but Elena knew better than to trust the quiet. The manor's walls held too many secrets, its name too much power, for the world to leave them alone. Charles Wentworth still came by, less often now, his role shifting from protector to advisor. He'd pushed her to hire a manager for the estate, someone to handle the day-to-day taxes, repairs, the endless upkeep of a house too big for one woman and a child. She'd relented, bringing on a brisk woman named Margaret, whose gray hair and no-nonsense stare reminded Elena of her late mother. Margaret kept the gears turning, freeing Elena to focus on Lucas, on learning the ropes of a life she'd never planned. But the learning was slow. Jagged, lino in the farm one. She'd sit in Victor's study late at night, poring over reports Wentworth sent, profit margins, stock trends, names of men and women who'd once bowed to Victor's will. Her head throbbed from the effort, her eyes burning, but she pressed on. She wasn't educated. Not like them. Her schooling had ended at 16, traded for a paycheck to keep her afloat after her parents died. Yet here she was, deciphering a world of wealth she'd once only glimpsed through a servant's lens. It scared her. How much she didn't know. How easily she could fail Lucas. But she'd promised Victor, and that vow was a fire in her veins, burning brighter with every page she turned. Lucas kept her sane. His world was small. Bright blocks and stories and muddy boots tracking dirt across the marble floors. She'd abandoned the strict cleanliness of her maid days, letting the manor breathe, letting it become a home. She'd read to him from Victor's old books, tales of knights and dragons, her voice steady even when her mind wandered to the man who'd left them behind. Lucas would curl into her side, his head heavy on her arm, and ask, "Was Daddy brave?" "They may make you wash." She'd swallow the lump in her throat and say, "Yes, Sweeturn, baby, the bravest." It wasn't a lie. Not really. Victor had faced death with a courage she still marveled at. A courage she drew on now. One chilly October morning, trouble found her again. She was in the kitchen, kneading dough for bread, a habit she couldn't shake, a tether to the simplicity she craved when Margaret appeared. Her face tight. "There's a man at the gate," she said, her voice low. "Says he's from the IRS. Wants to talk to you?" Elena's hands stilled, flour dusting her fingers, her stomach twisted, a cold dread seeping in. "The IRS," she echoed, wiping her hands on her apron. "What do they want?" Margaret shrugged, her lips a thin line. "Didn't say, just that it's about the estate. He's waiting." Elena nodded, her pulse quickening. She glanced at Lucas, coloring at the table, his crayons scattered like confetti. "Stay with him," she told Margaret, forcing calm into her voice. She smoothed her hair, squared her shoulders, and walked to the front gate, her boots crunching on the gravel drive. The man was middle-aged, balding, with a clipboard and a suit that strained at the seams. He introduced himself as Agent Kessler, his handshake clammy, his smile too tight. "Miss Harper," he said, flipping through his notes. "We've been reviewing Victor Blackwell's estate. There are discrepancies, unreported income, offshore accounts. We need access to your records." Her heart thudded, loud and insistent. "Discrepancies," she repeated, her voice steady despite the panic clawing at her. "I don't know anything about that." Victor's lawyer handled everything. Kessler's eyes narrowed, a glint of skepticism in them. "Convenient, but you're the executor now. If there's tax evasion, millions, potentially, you're liable. We can audit you, seize assets, freeze accounts. Unless you cooperate." Her mouth went dry, her mind racing. She didn't know offshore accounts from a hole in the ground. Victor's finances were a maze she'd barely begun to navigate. Was this real? A bluff. She thought of Lucas, of the manor. One more no more, more, of everything she'd fought to keep. I'll need to talk to my advisor, she said, crossing her arms. I'm not signing anything today. Kessler's smile faded, but he nodded. Fine. You've got a week. We'll be back. He handed her a card and left, his car kicking up dust as it rolled away. Elena stood there, the wind biting at her cheeks, the card trembling in her hand. She felt small, exposed, a mouse in a trap she hadn't seen coming. She called Wentworth the moment she got inside, her voice shaking as she relayed Kessler's words. Is this my fault? She asked, pacing the study. Did I miss something? No. Wentworth said, his tone sharp. This isn't you. Victor was meticulous, but he played hard. Some of his deals skirted the line. I'll dig into it. Could be a fishing expedition. Could be real. Either way, we'll handle it. She hung up, her knees weak, and sank into Victor's chair, her hands pressed to her face, her breaths shallow. Tax evasion. Millions or nearest son awards. The words spun in her head, a nightmare she couldn't wake from. She wasn't built for this. Courtrooms, audits eater, the weight of a dead man's choices. But Lucas's laughter drifted in from the kitchen, and she straightened, wiping her eyes. She'd figure it out. She always did. Wentworth arrived the next day, his face grim but determined. They spent hours in the study, combing through files, his team on the phone with accountants and lawyers. Victor had accounts in the Caymans, he admitted, rubbing his temples. Legal, mostly, but aggressive. The IRS might not care about the nuance. They see a target. They shoot. Elena's stomach churned. What happens if they're right? If he owed money, we pay it, Wentworth said, or we fight. The estate can handle a hit. Victor left you enough. But if they push hard, they could tie us up for years. Worst case, and they take the manor. Her breath caught, a visceral panic seizing her. They can't turn up, she whispered. This is Lucas's home. They won't turn him, he said, his voice firm. I'll bury them in paperwork before that happens. Trust me, she nodded. But trust felt fragile, a thread stretched thin. The week crawled by, each day a countdown to Kessler's return. She barely slept, her nights spent staring at the ceiling, imagining losing everything, the manor, the security, the life she'd promised Lucas. She'd snap awake, check on him, his small form curled under blankets, and whisper, Pikinman, Surinaman, Ikterwan. I won't let them take you. It was a vow to him, to Victor. Sirwatsuri Yuamorn, to herself. When Kessler returned, Wentworth was there, a wall of calm beside her. The agent brought a team this time, their briefcases and laptops an invasion. They set up in the dining room, demanding records Elena barely understood. Wentworth countered every move, his voice smooth but edged, handing over curated files while stalling on others. You'll get what's required, he told Kessler, and not a page more. Elena watched, her hands clasped tight, feeling useless but refusing to leave. Kessler's eyes flicked to her often, probing, but she met his gaze, her chin high. She wasn't the maid anymore. She was Lucas's mother, Victor's heir, and she'd be damned if she let this man see her break. The audit dragged into winter, a slow bleed of tension. Wentworth's team found gaps, minor unreported earnings, sloppy bookkeeping from Victor's later years, but nothing criminal. Sloppy, not illegal, he told her one night, snow tapping the windows. They're grasping. We can settle, small penalty, no admission of guilt. How much she serum? She asked, her voice hollow. $500,000. Pocket change for the estate. She laughed. A bitter sound. Pocket change. One in a short to one. She'd once saved for months to buy a used car. Do it, she said. I just want them gone. The settlement came in January. A check cut. Kessler's team packing up with grudging nods. Elena stood at the door as they left. The manor hers again. The air lighter. Wentworth clapped her shoulder. You held your ground. Victor'd be proud. She managed a smile. But exhaustion weighed her down. She'd won. Again. But the victories carved pieces from her, leaving scars she couldn't see. That night, she sat by Lucas's bed, watching him sleep, his chest rising and falling. We're safe, she whispered, brushing his curls. For now. Siren Mum. Spring brought renewal. Lucas turned 4. His party a chaos of balloons and cake in the garden. His friends from a local preschool shrieking with joy. Elena watched. Her pretty one, serenity, her heart full. The IRS a fading shadow. She'd hired tutors for herself, finance, law, determined to master Victor's world. Not just survive it. She'd never be him, but she'd be enough for Lucas. One evening, as the sun dipped low, she found another of Victor's letters, tucked in a book she'd pulled from the shelf. Elena, three from a read. You'll face wolves. They'll howl. They'll bite. A casino wasamon, but you're steel beneath the skin. Lucas will need that. So will you. I'm sorry I left you this mess. I'd have spared you if I could. She cried then, soft and steady, the letter crinkling in her hands. He'd known, always known, the cost she'd pay, but he trusted her to bear it. She folded the letter, tucked it away, and stepped outside. Lucas ran to her, his arms wide, and she lifted him, spinning him in the twilight. The manor loomed behind them, a sentinel of their past and future. She wasn't alone. Victor's faith, Lucas's love, her own grit held her up. The wolves would come again. She knew, but she'd face them. Everyone. With a strength she'd forged in fire. Summer draped Blackwell Manor in a golden haze, the air thick with the scent of blooming roses and freshly cut grass. Elena leaned against the porch railing, her eyes tracking Lucas as he darted through the sprinklers, his shrieks of delight piercing the lazy hum of cicadas. At 5, he was a whirlwind, tall for his age, his dark curls wild, his green eyes sparking with a mischief that made her laugh and ache in equal measure. He'd inherited Victor's intensity, that unyielding focus, but softened by a warmth she liked to think came from her. She sipped her lemonade, the ice clinking against the glass, and let herself breathe. The past year had been a hard-won quiet, the IRS settlement fading into memory, the manor settling into a rhythm she could almost call home. She'd grown into her role, piece by reluctant piece. The tutors had worked wonders. Finance no longer felt like a foreign tongue, and she could hold her own in meetings with Wentworth and the estate's board. Margaret still managed the house. It sorted one in a ward and Arna's were in Datsuma, her sharp efficiency a comfort. But Elena had taken the reins of Victor's empire with a steady hand. She'd sold a few smaller properties, warehouses in Jersey, a condo in Miami, using the funds to shore up the manor and secure Lucas's trust. It wasn't instinct yet, this dance of power and numbers, but it was hers. Earned through sleepless nights and a stubborn refusal to fail, Lucas kept her anchored. He'd started kindergarten that spring, a small private school nearby, and came home with stories of friends and finger paint disasters. She'd kneel beside him at the kitchen table, her fingers sticky with glue as they built lopsided crafts, his chatter filling the spaces Victor's absence had carved. She'd hung his drawings on the fridge, scribbled dragons, a stick figure family with Mama and Lucas labeled in wobbly letters. No daddy, not yet. But she'd catch him staring at Victor's photo sometimes, his brow furrowed, and wonder what he saw. One humid July evening, as thunder rumbled in the distance, a new shadow crept in. Elena was in the study, reviewing a quarterly report. When the phone rang, a rare sound since she'd switched most calls to email, she answered, her voice clipped from habit. Hello, Miss Harper. Juanita Chartied was his The voice was smooth, mellow, unfamiliar. This is Richard Hale, with Hale and Associates. I represent a group interested in Victor Blackwell's legacy. Her stomach tightened, a familiar dread prickling her skin. What kind of group? She asked, setting the report aside, her pen tapping against the desk. Investors, Hale said, his tone polished but evasive. We followed the Blackwell estate since Victor's passing. Your son's inheritance is significant. We'd like to discuss a partnership. Buying into some of the holdings, easing your burden. Her jaw clenched, easing her burden. She'd heard that line before, Wentworth's early offers, Lillian's veiled threats. I'm not looking to sell, she said, her voice flat. The estate's not a burden. It's my son's very was or not it was. A pause, then a soft chuckle. I understand your attachment, Miss Harper. But managing an empire alone, it's a lot for anyone. Let alone someone without Victor's experience. We're offering stability, expertise. Think of Lucas. Her grip tightened on the phone, her knuckles whitening. I am thinking of Lucas. That's why I'm saying no. Don't call again. She hung up before he could reply, her breath sharp, her heart pounding. She stood, pacing the study, the walls closing in. Investors. Another word for vultures, circling the moment they smelled weakness. She wasn't weak, not anymore. But they didn't see that. They saw a maid with a fortune, a woman out of her depth. She called Wentworth that night, her voice low so Lucas, asleep upstairs, wouldn't hear. Aixana. Richard Hale, she said, pacing again. Know him. Wentworth's sigh crackled through the line. Yeare, Inticum. Big player, private equity. Ruthless. He's not wrong about the estate's value. Elena, but he's a shark. Wants a piece. Probably the shipping lines. They're the crown jewel one. Can he force me? She asked, her hand gripping the back of Victor's chair. No, Wentworth said firmly. It's yours, Lucas's lock and key. But he'll push you, she should come and teach us. Offers. Pressure. Whenever in. Maybe dig for dirt. You've got to shut him down hard. She nodded. Though he couldn't see, I will watch anyone once. She hung up, her resolve hardening. Hale didn't know her, didn't know the fight she'd won, the steel she'd forged. She'd protect Lucas's legacy, no matter how many sharks swam her way. The pressure came faster than she'd expected. A week later, a courier delivered a thick envelope, Hale's proposal, glossy and detailed, promising millions for a strategic stake in Blackwell shipping. She skimmed it, her stomach souring at the polished lies. Phrases like legacy preservation, masking a grab for control. She burned it in the fireplace, the flames curling the pages to ash. But the next day, Hale called again. Miss Harper, I urge you to reconsider, he said, his voice silkier now, edged with impatience. This is a generous offer. Others might not be so polite. Threats don't work on me. Suri everything of her son. She snapped, her voice cold. Stay away from my son's future. She slammed the phone down, her hands trembling, anger and fear twisting in her gut. Others. What did that mean? She pictured Lucas, oblivious and laughing, and felt a primal urge to shield him from this world she couldn't escape. Wentworth arrived the next morning, his face etched with concern. Hale's not bluffing, he said, spreading files across the table. He's got backing, big money, maybe overseas. They're betting you'll crack. I won't. Whoa, she said, her voice low but fierce. What do? We flex. He replied, a rare grin tugging at his lips. Show them the estate's untouchable. I'll rally the board, loyalists, Victor's old guard. We lock down the shares. Make it clear you're not selling. Hale hates a wall he can't climb. She nodded, her mind racing but steadying. Do it. I want him gone. The counterattack took weeks. Meetings in sleek offices, late-night calls. Wentworth's team moving like a machine. Elena sat in on every session, her presence quiet but unyielding, her dark eyes daring anyone to doubt her. The board, a mix of gray-haired men and sharp-eyed women, rallied behind her, their loyalty to Victor's memory a shield she hadn't expected. He'd have hated Hale, one said Nguyen, a grizzled man named Porter, his voice rough with respect. You're doing right by him. Miss Harper, who trained to your Cortes-Mamont. By September, Hale backed off, his calls stopping, his shadow receding. Wentworth called it a win, but Elena felt the cost. Nights lost to worry. Her nerves frayed thin. She celebrated quietly, baking cookies with Lucas, his sticky hands on hers, his laughter washing away the tension. You're my hero. Oh, mama, he read us sort of, he said, crumbs on his chin, and she hugged him tight, her eyes stinging. She wasn't a hero, not yet, but for him, she'd try. Fall deepened, and with it came a new rhythm. Lucas thrived at school, his teachers praising his quick mind, his endless questions. Elena found herself dreaming of a future where he'd stand tall, not just as Victor's heir, but as her son, shaped by her love. Sheer Werner, her fight. She'd started writing to Victor, late at night, letters she'd never send. He's growing so fast. She wrote one evening, the pen scratching against paper. I'm scared I'll mess this up, but I'm trying. You'd laugh at me, still needing bread in your big house. But it keeps me sane. One crisp November day, a package arrived, no return address, just a plain box on the porch. She opened it warily, her pulse quickening, and found a stack of photos. Victor, younger vibrant, and Mirano Buenos Aires, on boats and beaches, with a note in his jagged scrawl. For Lucas, let him know me. Her breath hitched, tears blurring the images. She didn't know who'd sent it. Wentworth, maybe, or some old friend. But it felt like Victor reaching across time, a lifeline she hadn't known she needed. That night, she sat with Lucas on the couch. The photos spread before them. "This is your dad," she said, pointing to a shot of Victor grinning. The sea behind him. "He loved the water. Wanted you to have all this." Lucas traced the photo, his small brow furrowing. "Was he like me?" She smiled, her heart full. "Yeah, no one mama mima. Baby, smart on, parade in our Sheraton. Strong. He'd have loved you so much." Lucas nodded, solemn, and curled into her side. She held him. The photos a bridge between past and present, and felt a peace settle in her bones. Winter came sharp and cold, the manor aglow with light. She strung herself. Lucas's idea. His excitement infectious. She'd faced wolves, just as Victor warned, and more would come. But as she watched her son dance under the snowflakes, his laughter echoing, she knew she was ready. She'd built this life, messy, Huffernum, so hard, hers, and she'd guard it with everything she had. Victor's legacy was Lucas, but Lucas was hers, and that was a strength no one could take. Hey everyone, thanks for diving into this emotional roller coaster with us. If Elena and Lucas's journey tugged at your heartstrings, or had you on the edge of your seat, don't forget to smash that like button to let us know. Want more gripping stories of love, legacy, and unbreakable strength? Hit subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a moment. Share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear what moved you most. Let's build this community together. See you in the next story.